This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 22nd of October, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks. Michael Wade is not here. I don't know whether he is going to show up or not, so I don't have any indication. He didn't text me and say he wasn't going to be here, but I am here, and we are going to do a podcast anyway. And if Michael joins here in a little bit, that will be great. If not, we will just continue as normal. So let's. Oh, wait a second. Michael Wade is in the waiting room. He says he wants to be here. I've hit the admit button, so hopefully he will be able to. He'll be able to join us very soon as he comes in and begins to participate in the podcast. So tonight I want to talk about something that is going to be a bit of a bummer and is probably not something that is very pleasant to hear. But it is something that I think we need to talk about. And I'm unsure as to whether to go ahead and start or to wait until Michael gets on, because I don't know if Michael can hear me yet, because he's still showing the what do you call it? The logo for OBS. So he needs to turn his virtual camera on so that we can see him. As soon as he does, I will go to that. In the interim, let's take a look at something I wanted to talk about. And this is not showing me the correct window here. Ah, there he is. There's Michael. Hello, Michael. How are you? Can't hear you.
How about now?
That is better.
Let's try this. Is that better?
Yes, that is much better. So I think we're probably good to go there as far as sound goes. So for some reason, I'm showing the wrong window, and I don't know why. So let's try to reset this here. There we go. Now it's showing the right window. And so this is a post that showed up yesterday from Godsod, who is a professor and evolutionary scientist up in Canada. And let's just read it. You're not going to like this tweet, so turn away if you're likely to be triggered. I'm a very optimistic person. I'm a fighter for Western values and liberties. I am a dogged defender of science, reason, and common sense. I must say, though, that I'm unsure that the West can recover from its multi-front civilizational suicide. Yes, I've talked about these issues for decades and wrote a book about it, but the past few weeks have crystallized the extent to which the problem has become intractable. It will be a long and ultimately bloody demise, and the West will be the first society in recorded history to fully self-implode due to its parasitic ideological rapture. It is a gargantuan Greek tragedy that will shape the future of humanity. This is not hyperbole. Your grandchildren will pay a very high price for your progressive arrogance rooted in the pursuit of unicornia that only exists in the recesses of deeply flawed and parasitized minds. That sounds bad enough, but wait, it gets worse. Because the first response to this came from Brett Weinstein, who said the West is self-destructing and the implications are even worse than they initially sound. The world before the West evolved was barbaric, lineages constantly, violently displacing each other. But bloody as that mode was, humanity could plod along like that indefinitely. That is no longer the case. Suicide of the West will not just return humanity to full-time, all-consuming barbarism, it will almost certainly end our species in short order. The technology at our disposal is simply too powerful for a world without a basic agreement to prefer peaceful competition over endless war and genocide. Recognition of this stark but obvious fact coupled with the dawning recognition that the West is too far gone to save, should radically narrow our focus. Everything depends on our reviving, recreating, resurrecting, rediscovering, or reinventing the West before we forget what it was. Anything that doesn't stave off disaster in the present or contribute to that admittedly daunting objective is a waste of effort for the foreseeable future. That's, I've always been fairly, pessimistic, but this goes beyond even my normal set of pessimism. We've talked here for almost 20 years, I guess, about the coming either great national divorce or civil war that is looming. I am no longer sure that in the race towards destruction, the collapse of Western civilization will not short circuit any possible great national divorce on our part.
Yeah, it is interesting just because of how interconnected everything is in the world right now, especially when it comes to the elites and the citizens that are supposed to govern. It's a raging amount of difference. And there's less and less difference between the global ruling class. Their interests are paramount, and they seem to be pretty darn good at protecting them, even if it means the collapse of Western society.
The past couple of weeks, I think, have placed a stark spotlight on how far Western civilization has fallen. I think, well, there are two threads here that I think we need to tug on and pursue. The first is basically the Marxist critique of Western society that has basically become the standard paradigm that is taught in education. All we have to do is look at what has been going on in colleges for the past 2 weeks with this Israel-Hamas war that is now going on, and the number of Palestinian supporters who just have appeared on college campuses, who are so completely enamored with the idea of the oppressor/oppressed narrative that comes from Marxism, and just the number of students who are just wholly in the bag for Hamas. And there was another poll that was done this week that shows it even more starkly. Here we go. 51% of Americans polled between the ages of 18 and 24 think that the attacks of Hamas 2 weeks ago are fully justified by the grievances of the Palestinians. Following closely behind that, Americans 25 to 34 years old, almost half, 48%, now saying that they believe that those attacks are justified by the grievance of the Palestinians. And of course, that falls directly into the entire sort of grievance-based and group-based grievance critique of Western society. That is the one thread that has to be pulled on. The second thread is something that I wrote about, I guess, a couple of months ago, which is the lack of commitment to truth. And I think even truth, which is sort of the way that I characterized it here, the rejection of truth and its replacement with lies, I think it goes even farther beyond that. Now, the search for truth is important, as I think we pointed out, because you cannot navigate reality with a faulty map. And the only map we have is truth. I think truth is even too loose of a term. What I really see is the rejection of an ontological reality. In other words, a set of facts that exists outside your opinions or outside your feelings or outside your beliefs. And we are beginning to see even a rejection of ontological reality. A couple of years ago, Jessica Yaniv up in Canada, who first went to a spa to have her / his, Jessica Yaniv, for those who don't know, is a trans woman who still has the full set of male genitalia. She was refused a genital waxing at a service, who she immediately sued. Then she went to a gynecologist's office and was told that they don't serve transgender patients. And of course, she got all upset about that. Now, that was back in 2019, but even more recently, last month, a French doctor was he basically went through an entire pillorying nationally because, again, a trans woman came into his office, a full biological male, who, of course, believes that they're a woman, and he refused. Of course, much of this is in French because it did happen in France, but he was told, I'm a gynecologist and I take care of real women. I have no competence to treat men. No matter how much they've shaved their beards, I'm going to tell my secretary that they've become women. My GYN exam table is not adapted to examine men. You have specialized services that are very competent to take care of men like you. I thank you for informing trans people never to come to my office. Of course, he was nationally pilloried and was forced to go on national radio and abjectly apologize for his lack of sensitivity to a person who has all biological male parts coming in for a gynecology appointment. That is just a rejection of ontological reality. No matter how much you might feel like a woman, you still have male biological parts. A gynecologist is not the doctor for you, no matter how much you might wish it to be. No matter how much I might believe that I can climb on the roof of my house, flap my arms, and fly like a bird's, ontological reality will insist on just having me plummet straight to the ground. These two threads are becoming more and more pervasive in our society. Interestingly, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to reject this ontological reality. And I'm almost done, Michael, and I will give you a chance to speak. But again, it shows up in all kinds of really weird places. Netflix, if you remember last year, had this show about Cleopatra where they basically showed Cleopatra was a black woman. Cleopatra was Greek. She was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She was not black. Although what we're told, and this I think is a neat framing, and it comes from the New York Times, so you're going to have to forgive me if the big New York Times things comes in. But what they asked a specialist on Cleopatra whose examination was, well, it's not important whether she actually had dark skin or not. What's really important is that she was culturally black. So therefore, displaying her as black is not really any sort of violation of truth or reality. It's all just fine. But it's gotten into science as well. Let's take a look at some little clips over the last couple of years from Scientific American. The inequality between male and female athletes is a result not of inherent biological differences between the sexes, but of biases in how they are treating in sports, or how they're treated in sports. Another one from Scientific American. Trans girls belong on sports teams. There's no scientific basis for excluding them. Another one from Scientific American. Damar Hamlin's collapse highlights the violence black men experience in football, as if their experience with football violence was in some way qualitatively different than the experience of white people. And if there is a disproportionate impact on black people? Perhaps it is because there are a disproportionate number of black people in professional sports. I don't know how you maintain a modern technological society with these two threads pervading all elite opinion in society. I just don't know how you do it.
We certainly aren't going to do it with those particular leaders actually doing the leading, because they're going nowhere. And I'm hoping we're at the point that it's become just so over the top ridiculous and it's just so obvious that the emperor isn't wearing any clothes that people are really kind of stepping away. I think the reaction of a lot of the left to the massacre in Israel opened a lot of people's eyes.
Oh, well, I'm glad you brought that up. Here is a great tweet. Last night, I asserted that this report indicated that babies were beheaded by Hamas during the attack. This was an overstatement. I should have said that the report established that babies were found headless, a fact that lends plausibility to claims of beheading, but which does not prove them. Well,
God.
This is just again, it's a perversion of ontological reality. The heads did not spontaneously leap from the bodies of these children. They were removed. Therefore, they were beheaded.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just willful disbelief. And we've talked about this in a lot of contexts, but obviously the main one is in terms of dogma, religious dogma. When confronted with a specific fact that would completely undermine an entire religion that one has, built their life around. We have proof that Jesus was an amalgam of actually like 10 different people, and 3 of them were women. I mean, Christians aren't going to just accept that. I don't care how good the evidence is. There's going to be some rebellion. And when you've built your existence, your belief system on so many foundational lies that just plucking out any one collapses the entire system, well, it gets very, very, very difficult to go back to square one at that point. Certainly to admit that your ideological opponents might have had a few good ideas there. I mean, it's an all or nothing game at this point.
And it is, as we've talked about many times, primarily a religious impulse.
Mm-hmm.
These are purely ideological positions, and facts are irrelevant. First, like all this talk about Palestine, let's be clear. There has never been a Palestinian nation, ever, at any point in history. There was the Ubayyad Caliphate, which ran the region that is now referred to as Palestine. It's certainly what the Romans called it after they destroyed the Jewish revolt and exiled many Jews in 70 AD. And it was run by the Eastern Roman Empire until the Ubayyad Caliphate took it over. That region was slowly transferred over to the Ottoman Empire. In 1918, it was rather abruptly transferred to the British. And then in 1948, the state of Israel was recreated in largely the historical area where it had existed prior to 70 AD. There was never a Palestine. There was never a Palestinian state. Palestine was the name for a region, which, interestingly enough, is the name was forced upon that region by its colonial occupiers from Rome. So, boy, that's a string you don't want to pull on with your oppressor-oppressed bias in terms of how this state was created. Again, it is a preference for what people believe are comforting truths rather than, or comforting lies rather than unpleasant truths.
Well, especially when the comforting lies simply can't withstand those uncomfortable truths. I mean, it's in direct opposition to your belief system. I mean, that's a direct physical, realistic challenge to your entire worldview. That's not easy to face for anybody. But the fact that what's been swallowed as religious dogma by pretty much all the left and some of the right is just, it's like, why would you waste your belief system on climate change? Well, yeah, of course climate changes, but now you're a believer in experts. Yeah, how'd they do during the pandemic? How come none of the predictions these experts have been making on climate change for what now 4 or 5 decades have come true? Not one of them. It's just, but this is what they put their belief in.
Yeah, well, very interesting. And you just brought up, you just brought up COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look at a little chart, and let's see. Can I just show this whole thing as a window here, because I do want to look at that. The U.S. just lost 20, and again, Scientific American. So I know the data is correct because it's repeated in many places. So even though Scientific American simply can't be trusted on anything having to do with culture, this has been replicated pretty much elsewhere. Life expectancy at birth since 2019 has declined sharply, and we can see this basically all over the map. No matter where we want to look, no matter what health systems we want to track, it just fell off a cliff in 2019 and continues to fall in 2023. What might have caused this sharp decline in U.S. life expectancy? Was it simply COVID alone? Was it a mass medical intervention that was undertaken in response to COVID that was not properly safety tested? I don't know, but it's a question that we're not allowed to ask.
Actually, it's kind of interesting. You can see it starts right around 2010 or so there, isn't it?
Well, it does start to flatten out. So we have had very flat life expectancy since 2010, and then in 2019, it just fell off a cliff. And by the way, it's falling off a cliff for pretty much everybody. Now, most of these numbers end at 2021. There was a chart I saw that also had the 2022 numbers in there. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find it. But irrespective of where you look, we see the same drop off right off the cliff. And so we were fairly steady at 78.7, 78.6 years of life expectancy. And then in 2019, it started to climb, and then it just fell off the cliff in 2020. Why might that be? What was happening during that time that might have had some effect on life expectancy? There are certain explanations for why this might be that we are simply not allowed to ask.
Oh, so we're going to ask him now, I guess.
I'm not even specifically asking the question. I'm just pointing out the problem. And by the way, this is not just in the United States. If you were to look, and this past week there was actually in the UK a parliamentary debate, although not very well attended, about the enormous rise in excess deaths that have occurred in England since 2020. And again, nobody is really interested in getting to the bottom of why that might be. So I don't have a lot of hope for the future. here based on the trends that we're seeing. And I never would have thought that after a terrorist attack like this, that there would actually be mass demonstrations in support of a literal terrorist organization. And people are perfectly happy with it because they've fallen for this oppressor dynamic. And Hamas, whose very charter calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, they're now the good guys. We see Hollywood people who are kind of split, but a lot of them coming out in favor of the Palestinians, all the college students, as we talked about earlier before, and of course the number of immigrants that we have let in from the Middle East makes places like Dearborn, Michigan, say, I suspect, a rather dangerous place to be if you're Jewish.
Yeah.
And I don't know what we can do to turn this thing around.
I mean, there are several steps we could take, but are they enough? I don't know. Obviously, closing the border would be one. Ramping up our energy production would be another one. I mean, and these two things alone have great consequences for us and for the world. Just starting there would at least start to move things back in the right direction. Remember, we were doing this before. Under Trump, we were having peace treaties signed in the Middle East for the first time since the 70s. So clearly something was going well. And ever since Biden came in, it's just all gone to shit, and very quickly and predictably.
Yeah, I think we
So
both.
we could stop.
I think we both predicted that a Biden presidency was going to be an absolute disaster, and so far,
Yeah.
that's precisely what it has turned into, a disaster.
Well, especially when he tells you what he's going to do, and everybody who knows, like, that it doesn't work. We've tried it before. It failed miserably. It's not going to work this time just because you really believe in it. But it doesn't matter. So keep getting the same failed ideas shoved down our throats. And I guess we just put up with it.
And by the way, go ahead.
I was going to say there's just no faith left in the system at all. And that's what the last time we were on, we talked a lot about that, about how our institutions have really exposed themselves as not only being incompetent, but nefarious. And that's, resulting in a very quick change of mood amongst both left and right and everybody in the middle against the government. And that's the one thing that they cannot afford to lose, because without those institutions, they have no way of implementing what they want to implement.
Well, I'll tell you how bad it's gotten. In France and Germany, first of all, President Macron of France and the German Interior Minister are already discussing, France has pretty much made it explicit, that if you are part of these Palestinian protests or you support Palestine and you're an immigrant, they are going to toss you into a migrant camp and deport you at the earliest possible opportunity.
Okay, sounds good.
So there is enough pushback in those countries to make them at least make mouth noises about sending some of these immigrants back. The United States, unlike France and Germany and Great Britain, is far more of an ideological construct than it is a racial or cultural construct. And the United States has always been willing to allow people from pretty much anywhere to come here. Prior to 1926, whenever we basically shut off all immigration until 1986, so we had a 40-year large pause in immigration. But we always talk about America as being this land of immigrants, and largely that is true, although largely those immigrants were from Great Britain, Scotland, and Ireland, as well as some from Germany and some from France.
Italy.
Italy, of course, and certainly at the end of the 19th century. But the situation that obtained in the United States was, we're happy to welcome you into this country, but we are not, as a matter of policy, going to do anything to help you once you get here. You will have to find a way to survive and find a way to support yourself. And if you cannot, well, many people simply went back to the old country because they couldn't make it in the United States. The support system that existed for immigrants, to the extent that any existed at all, was basically one of voluntary cooperation. Community groups, charities, and what have you, who voluntarily assisted immigrants. There was no welfare state. There was no sort of government intervention in what happened to immigrants. And in a situation like that, especially when you have a strong, confident culture that tries to assimilate immigrants into sort of the American ideology, which is sort of the classical ideology of Enlightenment liberalism, well, you can pretty much have as much immigration as you want. But after the Immigration Act of 1986, that was not the America that existed. We now had a full suite of social services, not certainly as expansive as those in Europe, but immigrants could come here and expect to be supported by the government. And since 1986, we've allowed millions and millions of people to come in and not required them to stand on their own 2 feet, but instead have increasingly allowed them direct access to all of the social resources of the United States government and the state governments of the states in which they found themselves once they illegally made their way here.
Yeah, they've got it pretty good once they get here.
Well, the fact that they're willing to come here, and whatever you might think about illegal immigrants, the fact is they wouldn't come here if they didn't think it would be better for them here than in their home country.
Right. It's their next best opportunity.
However, if we're not going to assimilate them, and largely we don't, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, all of the imbroglio about, education in Spanish, so that we'll just have them, why even learn English? Indeed, let's make Spanish a second language in the United States. We're basically perfectly happy, or at least the elites that run our institutions are perfectly happy to gut our traditional culture, and doing so guts the traditional ideas of American government. It guts the ideas ultimately of individual liberty, of free speech, and ultimately it turns the country over to people who do not share those values, or at least enough to permanently alter the type of political system that we have. And there's never been any acknowledgement of this. It's one of the things that really irks me about, the traditional formal libertarian party, who just want unrestricted immigration because anyone should have the right to live anywhere that they want. And that's something I've never really agreed with as far as the standard libertarian philosophy goes. But that sort of libertarian idea has certainly been the animating idea of our entire immigration system since 1986.
I've never really bought that as a libertarian idea. It's more of an anarchist idea.
Well, yeah. Although the Libertarian Party has largely turned into an anarcho-capitalist party since the 1980s.
That's true. But either way, whatever the labels are. I mean, one thing is certainly true that, however awful and racist and whatever else the United States is, the big oppressor, sure got an awful lot of people literally dying to get in here. Just get a foothold inside the door. And then at least they seem to believe that things are going to improve. Well, why is that? if we're so awful and racist, and what is it that they see that you don't see? And what they see is jobs.
That's true. And what the trouble is, it takes us back to this denial of ontological reality. And we're often told, and this has, by the way, been the argument of the Chamber of Commerce, big business types for a couple of decades now. Well, there's all these jobs Americans won't do. And we're having an older population. The baby boomers are passing away. So we need immigration to keep all of our jobs and everything running, which I suppose is true and would be perfectly defensible as long as you believe that people who come in from other countries are fungible economic units who do not bring in any sort of different cultural or political ideas. So when you look at a place like Dearborn, where is a large Muslim population, and whether you like it or not, Islam is inherently theocratic, which means that it is inherently in opposition to the type of democratic governance that we have. Let in enough and they will fundamentally change the political system that we have, and not for the better. And by the way, we can see this happening in Europe, who've had far more Muslim immigration than we have had in this country. And we hear about the no-go areas in France or the areas in Germany or even Sweden now, where they all want to be ruled by Sharia law, and the law of the host country that has let them come in is utterly irrelevant to them because they reject it. You can't maintain a polity if you have a large plurality of your population who rejects the fundamental ideas that underlie your system of governance and culture.
Yeah, because it's one thing for them to obey. It's another thing for them to actually live and breathe it, to understand it. And, there's the old term, you can fake it till you make it. But you can't really ever make it until you fully buy into the concept of individual rights, and that the state, while necessary, is a necessary evil. And once you can get those basic concepts of power imbalance down, and how these checks and balances work to make it functional, I think it's a pretty easy thing to go along with.
But the only way that you
actively want to undermine the current culture.
Yeah, but the only way that you can do that is to have an explicit and intentional policy of assimilation.
Right.
And a requirement that they subscribe to those beliefs to be allowed to stay, or certainly to be allowed to become a citizen where they have a say in the political process. And that requires a culture that is confident in himself, and that culture no longer exists, not in the West.
Well, I mean, we have those things in the West. It's just that you're a sucker if you use those methods to become a citizen, when you can just walk right in, start enjoying benefits now, and eventually you'll just get a free pass.
Yeah, you'll get your amnesty, and then you'll get to stay forever.
Right.
And ultimately become a citizen. I think there was one of the congressmen was looking at these pro-Hamas protests, which have a lot of immigrant participation, and they were saying for most of these immigrants, if you have been allowed into the U.S. legally in the last 5 years and you're out advocating for Hamas, we should just deport you right now.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
Clearly you lied on your entrance questionnaire.
So did some of the people entering Congress.
Yeah, well, Congress is a whole nother thing that we'll probably talk about here in a little bit. So I just don't know. I mean, the Brett Weinstein thing is, let's do everything we possibly can to revive Western civilization. Yeah, I'm sure there was somebody sitting in Rome in, 419 AD who was saying the same thing. We need to revive the old Roman values. Yeah, well, good luck with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem when your supposed standard bearers for those ideals, for those values, um, couldn't care less about them, you know, or use them for demagoguery, and that's it. Much less that they even understand them. I mean, you don't have anybody rah-rahing, cheering for the culture. You know, when they started taking it, and I guess this started back in the late '80s, early '90s, when they started taking Western Civ out of colleges as a, you know, like a standard course that you had to take. Usually you have like what, like 18 credits or something. Maybe it's more that you have to take in your first year to
Yeah,
to
all of the dead white men
everybody has to
courses.
take it.
All
Yeah,
of the
right.
dead white men courses, as they called them. The thing that's truly frightening is the thing that Brett Weinstein brings up. Look, back in the, 10th century, it was perfectly fine to have all of these civil wars and all of, the 30 years war, the 100 years war, because at the end of the day, the destructive capability of even the most advanced military force was largely limited to the additional reach that you could get from your arms with a spear or a sword. And even the heaviest of artillery, trebuchets, catapults, your maximum range was a couple of 100 yards. So, and you could only really move as fast as you could force men to march in a single day. So the ability to have a widespread destruction on society, even with the largest of medieval armies, some of which got up to 60 to maybe 70,000 men. But again, even trying to feed those people, their forage was limited to how far they could ride a horse in a day and back to bring back food. And so in any country of any size, France, Britain, whatever, that was a tiny, minuscule portion of the population. And so the amount of actual disruption that you could do to day life, with the exception of people who are within a half day's ride of where you were currently located, was impossible. In a world where nuclear weapons exist, and where it is a 70-year-old technology whose principles are now universally well known and able to be applied by any state level actor, the fall of the West would, I think, result in ultimately a fairly large nuclear war. And I just don't know how civilization survives. And without the West, I don't know how civilization survives in general. Certainly not. We will not support 7 billion people on this planet. That is for sure.
No, we couldn't. They can't even support themselves. Um, yeah, without the West, it's a free for all. I mean, even the East can. I mean, China can barely contain what's going on in China, and China has never been expansionary.
And China is not self-sufficient in either food or energy.
Right. That's right. They need a lot of both to come from the outside. Um, I don't see how the East is anywhere near ready to take over. Maybe Japan and Korea,
and certainly not
Taiwan.
with China, and certainly with its demographics problem and a population that over the next half century is going to decline by half. They're going to have a lot of difficulty doing anything outside China.
Yeah, that's right. But either way, I mean, without just the Western ideals that have been developed over the past, 2,000-3,000 years, I mean, you are then awash in a bunch of differently styled collectivist societies, none of which recognize an individual's worth at all. Matter of fact, everybody is subject to the will of the common good, whoever makes those decisions.
Yeah, well, that's really a reversion to the historical norm, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you did have were guilds and whatever, in the ancient Teutonic army or villages and whatever, but it was still a warlord uh, status quo. I mean, that was how it worked. I mean, you didn't really have a base. You might have a couple bases, but the rest of the time you're out just taking what everybody else made.
Yeah, but also at the same time, the ability of a king to actually show up and personally oppress you was fairly limited.
True.
In a
Well,
country.
and the ability of a king to keep an entire, geographic area safe from intruders and making friends with those on the borders. I mean, that was also kind of rare. Um, but I mean, that's essentially what warlord society is, and that's what we had throughout the Middle Ages.
Yeah, I mean, one could make the argument that the Roman Empire itself was a warlord society.
To a certain extent, it was, yeah. Well, except that there was only one warlord.
Yes. Um, so I keep casting about for any reason for optimism, and I simply can't find it. We seem bound and determined, or I say we. It's not really we, is it? It's the fact that we have allowed governments to become so powerful, something that was supposed to be anathema to Americans, um, and so large and so intrusive in our daily lives that basically they call the shots. And we allow them to get away with it.
I mean, that's true. I think you said the right word, intrusive. And we've invited them into our lives. I can't do it on my own, Mr. Government. I need some help. You need to come in here and help me. Well, okay, sure. But it's like inviting the mafia in when your restaurant is not doing too well. Okay, great. They'll protect you, but they're also going to be rubbing you blind while they're doing it. And in the end, well, you can't pay me. All right, down it goes. I mean, that's just the government works the exact same way.
And as far as I can tell, and I used to be a real big advocate of the government is incompetent and it's filled with fools, which is, by the way, still true. But the fools are not just incompetent, they're malevolent.
Right.
They're intentionally destroying society. Either that, or they are so foolish and so dumb and so willing to reject ontological reality, which could also be possible, that they refuse to acknowledge that their policies are killing our societies.
I think for a lot of people, the useful idiots, that they do. That's exactly what they do. They either willfully block it out or just have no clue, will just refuse to put two and two together. I mean, I don't say you can't, I don't think it's an issue of it cannot be figured out, that it can't be deduced. It's just a blindness. I have to assume that it's mostly willful because the information is out there. The results are right there in front of you. I mean, why would you keep doing the same thing over and over again when it never works? Well, socialism will work this time. They're saying it again now. They're doing the exact same thing. The playbook has never changed, nor have any of the plays. They just give them different names.
And we're not even, the thing that irks me about America, we're not even politically active enough to try to make any change. I mean, we got a guy that's 80 years old who's the Senate Majority Leader. We've got a 78, 79-year-old president. His putative opponent, his most likely opponent, is another 78-year-old fella who wants to run for president the second time. I mean, happily, sheer demographics will ensure that their remaining time in politics is short. But we don't even seem willing to get rid of them, even though we could.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Well, I guess we get what we want, good and hard.
And by the way, there was another poll that was done this week, and I don't want to get too in depth in it because okay, well, the screen share, I opened a new window, so sorry. There we go. There's my screen share that's working. And it's all about Hamas and what have you, and how aware people are. And what I'm interested in all of these opinion charts is the area in orange. The number of people who just say, I don't know anything about that.
That's in orange?
That's in orange. And so basically, it all runs 30% plus.
Mm-hmm.
Who are these people who make up fully a third of the population who just have no clue about anything? And by the way, 30% is on the good side. Here's 50% who just aren't informed about it, and they can't form an opinion. And all of this orange is a big number. Although down here, the unfavorable is in orange, not the I don't knows. But just a third of people in this country think everything is just fine.
Maybe it is for them. It's not for the rest of us.
Yeah, I just don't know how you can be so divorced.
Well, I'm not static about these things either. I mean, I don't think about it just in terms of right now. I mean, I think of, okay, how's the horizon looking too? It doesn't look any better. It only looks worse. I don't see any reason to get excited about the economy. I can't see one single reason to get excited about the economy. We're still pumping a bunch of fake money into it. The share of GDP that comes from the federal government, well, that comes from government overall, keeps rising. It's well above 20% now.
It's well above 25% now if we include state and local government.
If you include state and local. So, I mean, that's not a good sign.
And by the way, we include that in GDP numbers.
Right.
So a quarter of our GDP are transfer payments.
Right.
From productive citizens to the government, who then redistributes it in some way. That's a zero-sum game. And
well, I mean, it also goes to pay for like road work and building new airplanes and whatever else. But yeah, the vast majority of is transfer payments.
Yeah, well,
and then
2/3.
You know what really gets me is you get the Social Security, and it gets taxed when you get paid Social Security.
Yeah, 2/3.
Like, wait a minute.
2/3 of all federal government spending are basically Social Security and Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2/3 transfer payments. The amount of money that's going to roads. And by the way, Defense Department, all of the billions that we spend on ships or planes or whatever, which we count, by the way, as durable goods, are only durable right up until the minute that the first shot fires. Then they're all disposable. But we count them as durable goods. It's part of our GDP. A quarter of our GDP, right. Basically a quarter of our GDP almost is just transfer payments. It's not real money. To the extent that it is money, real money, it's money that's created whole cloth from borrowing and from monetary policy.
Yeah, exactly. That's the money we're pouring into out of the treasury directly into the economy without, most of this, the vast majority of this is mandatory payments. That Congress doesn't even get to decide on. There's no budget for that stuff.
No, Social Security and Medicare their spending levels are set by law. They're not part of the budget discussions or anything else. Our entire stuff about the budget and all of that is really confined to 1/3 of the federal budget.
Right. And that's mostly discretionary. And so it's like, I mean, that's what's always so funny about it. Oh, the government's going to shut down. Yeah, 1/3 of it. So Ricky's not going to man the Park Station entrance. Oh, well.
Yeah, but
I mean,
the Republicans are terrified of a government shutdown.
yep. Well, at least some of them.
Yeah, I mean they'll pass an omnibus spending bill at the drop of a hat to avoid it. We have not had a federal budget, by which I mean a federal budget
96?
that was submitted by the president, debated by the Congress, and then passed in regular order in spending for, it was later than 96. We did have a continuing resolution in 97, but we did go back to regular order, I believe, in 98 and 99. But since 2001, so for 22 years, the federal government, the Congress has not passed a budget. Not once.
Right.
And by the way, this is their job. They're constitutionally
mandated by law.
Yeah, they're constitutionally mandated to create a budget. And of course, there is the Federal Budget Act. They are required by law to pass it. They don't. And nothing happens. So what we have gotten, and by the way, we have gotten this almost every year for the past 10 years, is a threat of a government shutdown, which is always averted by Republicans and Democrats getting together, creating an omnibus spending bill and passing it as one big fell swoop, which, by the way, is how we get $800 billion in, relief for this, and, $5 trillion for COVID relief over however many years. All of that comes out of this omnibus. And it's gotten to the point where Congress apparently doesn't even feel the need to create a budget. And so therefore,
that was a big part of why McCarthy got ousted, is because just they refused to do it. And that was one of the promises they made, that we would return to regular order.
Yes. I don't know if I would go so far as Matt Gaetz did to say that McCarthy lied. I'm sure that McCarthy had the intent to return to regular order. But I think what we're seeing now that McCarthy, so we might as well talk about it. 2 weeks ago, Matt Gaetz and 8 Republicans voted with the Democrats to vacate the Speaker's chair. Kevin McCarthy was removed as Speaker. And we have now gone through the Steve Scalise boom, the Jim Jordan boom, and now the oh my God who boom that we're in the middle of right now, because no one has the ability to command a majority of the House in a vote for Speaker. And so right now, in the middle of what is a growing international crisis, we don't have a House of Representatives that can do anything except for the very limited business that they're allowed to do under the control of a Speaker pro tem.
They can't do any appropriations.
And by the way, I don't have a brief for McCarthy. I don't have a brief for Matt Gaetz. I don't have a brief for Jordan or for Scalise. They're all politicians in Washington, D.C., and I trust none of them.
Especially when they get together.
Yeah, but it's difficult for me to believe that a speakership, living with Kevin McCarthy for another year, is a worse alternative than what it looks like we are heading for with this speaker race.
I don't know. I mean,
it just seems like a remarkably stupid idea when you have a 5-vote majority in the House to throw away the Speaker's chair. And it seems especially stupid to do that without a clear plan of who the next Speaker is going to be. This is
we don't know that they did, but
what we have heard from people who spoke to Matt Gaetz was he didn't have a plan for what to do afterwards. He just apparently thought miracles would happen. Everybody would coalesce around somebody like Jim Jordan, and we'd go back into the majority. That didn't happen. And so now we are perilously close to having to find some sort of bipartisan consensus with some Democrats to put in what I think would probably be a less conservative alternative to Kevin McCarthy. That might be difficult to imagine, but there you have it.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
It was just a galactically stupid idea to throw away the speakership when you have a 5-seat majority. I would.
It certainly didn't play out the way I think they hoped it would play out.
No, and Jordan never even came close. I mean, even at McCarthy,
he was within 6 votes at one point.
No, 20.
Yeah,
it was 20, 22, and 27. That was how short he came in the 3 votes that the House had to elect a speaker. He never got closer than 20 votes away. Even McCarthy got 20 votes on his first ballot and then managed to get the speakership. Jim Jordan did worse on every single ballot. So, at a time when we don't need chaos, we've got chaos.
Again, I mean, something has to happen. I mean, you can't keep going along to get along.
My response to that would be, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't go along to, keep getting on. But it's this is an argument I hear, but at least they're fighting for us. Okay, that's great. I appreciate that they're fighting. However, you have to have a plan. You have to have the ability to have some hope of success. Fighting for fighting's sake is just chaos. I mean, it doesn't advance what you're trying to do. It just makes you part of the burn it all down caucus.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm a little more favorable to that caucus at this point, but look, I don't disagree that this has caused a lot of issues, that it wasn't well planned enough out. But at the same time, I don't disagree that something had to be done, especially with this spending bill and the way things are going, and with the way the unseriousness with which this administration is approaching the economic, not collapse, but certainly blundering going on. They're trying to hide statistics and play games with, what does come out. And it's clear when you look at you don't even have to do a deep dive into the numbers. It's staring you right in the face. More people have 2 jobs now than ever. The labor participation force continues to be anemic. People aren't making as much as they were thanks to inflation. Yeah, nominal wages may be ahead of nominal wages of years ago to keep up with inflation and purchasing power. So, I mean, these things are known. You can see this, but the administration is just, full steam ahead with the nonsense. And I don't know. I mean, how do you deal with that? How do you function with that? Nobody's going to do anything to slow the train down, and it's just heading for disaster.
One of the things, by the way, I just happened to notice looking over here at chat. Hi, chat. I see you there. I know I've been ignoring you for the podcast, but I do see you there. I do notice Eric Florak is in chat. Somebody that we should probably remember from the Q&O days. Also, by the way, for those of you who are watching in chat, I'm getting YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. So, gonna have to apologize for the stream quality that we are seeing. Again, don't know why. I've got huge amounts of bandwidth, and it's just not going out. So there may be some sort of network issue or what have you. I'm seeing that we're getting some dropped frames and whatnot. I apologize. Don't know why. Sometimes we have really great, perfect HD video, and sometimes we don't. And today we don't for whatever reason. So sorry about that. If you're for those of you who are watching at home. Yeah. Oh, I thought it was on my end. Audio is going in and out. Yes, I'm sure that it is. I'm seeing big drops in kilobytes per second and don't know why. So I'm going to assume it's a network thing. I'm going to blame Cox because I'm supposed to have gigabit internet and that ain't what I'm putting out. I just saw kilobytes per second drop to 0. So this is not working, and we're about 6% of dropped frames. So again, I apologize. Don't know why. I'm going to assume that it is a problem with Cox, and we're all just going to have to live with it, I guess. Oddly enough, I don't notice that over on the Zoom side. You seem to be doing just fine, Michael. So looking at you is just fine.
Feeling good, Mortimer.
So I forgot where we were and what we were talking about because I got all distracted by chat and then noticing that we're not having a great YouTube experience.
We were just talking about, making a stand on the budget when nobody else will. And I guess just everybody waiting for the can to get kicked so far down the road that it's not their problem anymore. Although I think that's getting harder and harder to do.
The trouble is that a society as rich as ours has a lot of space to eat our seed corn before everything falls apart. And things look okay for most people right up until the minute that it doesn't. And then everything is a disaster. And look, just something simple. What happens if our transportation system breaks down? Okay, there are millions of people who live in cities who are just going to starve to death because they've got 3 days of food in the supermarket and then it's gone. And if we can't get more food to it, then people who live in Chicago or New York or Los Angeles, what are they going to eat? The answer is going to be either nothing or each other, but those are pretty bleak alternatives.
Yeah, well,
we
I
have
guess you could still